This morning I was actually at FNU, at the Laucala Campus, where we did a similar presentation to them and had some very good discussions. So I'd like to keep more time available for you to be able to ask questions. If you have any queries, we can talk about the budget. What I'd like to do very quickly is take you through some of the key indicators as far as the economy is concerned, some of the statistics available, and some of the key issues that we do look at. So we start off with the first slide. You'll see the economic growth. We don't have a separate printer. Please printer. So you'll see that we've had economic growth rate now economic growth for 8 years straight, and you can see the projected growth rate over here is 3.8, then going to 3, and then 2.9. We of course had, because of Winston, we had a downgrading of the growth rate. This is why we don't like cyclones. It kills people. It costs a lot of money. Infrastructure gets damaged. Schools get destroyed. Waterworks, sewage pipes, roads, electricity. In Cyclone Winston, 6,000 kilometers of electrical cables actually went down in Fiji. So we have to have a huge rebuild as far as the, for example, electricity was concerned. The issue over here, ladies and gentlemen, is that whilst the economy is growing, as a government, we need to ensure, as a country, all of us need to ensure that we take advantage of this growth. And that means we need to have the right people at the right places doing the right things, and also to ensure that as the economy grows, there's a demand for new and increased type of services. So, for example, at the moment in Fiji, there's a shortage of town planners. There's shortage of land surveyors, there's shortage of marine scientists, shortage of foresters. Now, if we don't have these people in the right positions at the right time, that economic growth actually can deteriorate. So this is why government, for example, is giving scholarships in those types of areas. This is why we have, for example, reduced the civil service retirement age to 55. All of you people here, apart from a few older people like ourselves in this front line over here, we are in the minority, you are in the majority. 69.4% of the entire Fijian population is below the age of 40. So you are the driving force, you are the intellect, you are the knowledge base that will actually provide the economic growth for the country. In a very few years' time, you'll be ones out in the workforce. You'll be setting up your own businesses, you'll be working as civil servants, you'll be working in the private sector, and we need you to be able to be in the right positions to be able to take advantage of this growth. We can discuss more of that later. You can see what are the areas that actually contribute to that growth. Where's the growth coming from? Agriculture is 0.34%. Fisheries and forestry, you can see it's extremely low. So in other words, there's a lot of potential here. Manufacturing is quite significant. Construction is quite significant. Electricity, water, mining, of course, these are slower areas. But services sector, we believe there's a lot of future in the services sector. You can see financial services contributes about 0.45%. Fiji is in the hub of the South Pacific. We talk a lot about hubbing. We talk about positioning ourselves, and whether it is ensuring that we have very good, stable infrastructure as far as ICT services are concerned. That is very, very important. We've got back-end processing, business BPOs being set up in Fiji, and that provides a lot of economic, not just economic opportunities, but employment opportunities for young Fijians. A few years ago, we had a company from South Africa that came and set up a call center in Fiji. We met up with them. We provided a lot of incentives for them to actually set up shop. So all the wages that they paid to the people they employed, we actually gave them a rebate on the amount of wages they paid, just for them to be able to stay in Fiji. And I asked them, I said, why are you coming to Fiji? What's the interest in Fiji? They raised about 2 or 3 key issues. They said, firstly, Fiji is in a good time zone. We're exactly 12 hours ahead of Greenwich Mean Time, 12 hours ahead of UK. The time zone is actually quite good. It fits in well with USA, with UK, and various other places. Secondly, the cost of the infrastructure provision is relatively attractive. And of course, there's potential to increase the bandwidth, etc. The third thing, which I did not know about, well, partially I knew about it, was that we all speak English. And they said because we have a literate English workforce. But more importantly, they said, was that we Fijians apparently have a neutral accent. So it is easier for an American, for a British person, for an Australian to understand a Fijian speaking English than for them to understand a Filipino or an Indian, where they have call centers set up. So we have apparently what they call neutral accents. If you go to places like India and Philippines, where they set up call centers and BPOs, they spend literally millions of dollars to get these people to change their accents. So if somebody is making a phone call, the American actually can understand them. So this is obviously some advantage that we did not have, that we did not know about, that we have. 2 weeks ago, I was at GPH. There's a group of your fellow students from USP, from FNU, from University of Fiji, where ANZ had brought them all together to develop apps. Different applications that can be developed that are suitable for us, that can be trademarked, can be patented. I don't know how many of you know, but the M-Pesa program was written by a young man from Vanuatu. So there's obviously a lot of potential in that area, and we've got various incentives in the ITC sector. You'll see various tax incentives that we've given for people to set up those kind of businesses. Construction industry, I wanted to highlight this. Enormous demand in the construction industry. There's actually a shortage of tradespeople. There are construction people at the moment in Fiji who are bringing tradespeople from Bangladesh, in Indonesia, in Philippines, because we don't have enough of good tradespeople in Fiji. There's a huge demand. We have welders here, Fijian welders, on construction sites being paid $15, $16 an hour. Normal bricklayers are being paid $8, $9 an hour. We have a lot of complaints by builders. They're saying, one day I have 10 bricklayers on my construction site. The next day I go there, they've all disappeared. They've gone to the next construction site where the guys offer them another $1 more an hour. That's the level of fluidity that we actually have. There's a huge demand in that area. Electricians are being paid $12, $13 an hour. There's a shortage of those people. Of course, some Fijians have been poached by Christchurch. You know, they have the huge rebuild after the earthquake, so a lot of them have gone there. We have a shortage, more demand. So these are some of the challenges that we actually have to address through setting up of technical colleges, etc. But these, from a government policy perspective, we have to ensure, and this is what we've been working towards in the past number of years, that there are a number of areas that actually contribute to the growth rate. We cannot simply be dependent on, say, sugar and tourism. We were lucky in Cyclone Winston that the cyclone did not actually damage a lot of the hotel properties. If it had, we would have been in dire straits with all the damage that was caused. So we need to ensure as a government that we mitigate our risks. So if, for example, a cyclone comes along, if it affects agriculture, we can depend on other things. So if your ITC services are there, we are setting up a simulator school in Nandi, where we set through Fiji Airways. We've given them some funding. So we'll have pilots from overseas. As you know, pilots, for example, once you become a pilot, every few hundred hours, even though you may be a senior pilot, you actually have to go for simulator classes to upgrade yourself. We already have companies from even Australia and New Zealand saying, when are you setting up the simulator school? We want to send our pilots to Fiji. What does that mean? It means we don't have to send our pilots overseas. It means we'll get people coming from overseas. They use our hotel rooms. They use our other services. It creates an entire new industry in itself. So this is what we're doing. This is, from our perspective, to mitigate the risk by having a broad-based growth. Inflation, as you can see, our target has been in the past few years to keep inflation down relatively low, below 2%. That's where it was. Of course, Winston has a huge impact on that. Yangona costs $120 a kilo till today. Some people still drink it at the same rate. A bunch of bananas, after Winston cost $20 in Suva. A bundle of beans is $5. But as we get out of the cyclone cycle, or the effects of that, then you can see inflation dropping down to around about 2% as we speak. Sorry, I'm not, okay. Foreign reserves. This is something that a lot of people don't really understand. The international benchmark is that you should have at least, these are the months, at least 4 months worth of reserves to buy to have foreign reserves, 4 months worth, to trade. Now this lady, for example, who's got this mobile phone, recording me, that mobile phone is imported. The watch she's wearing is imported. The bag she's got is imported. The gel she's probably using her hair is all imported. The shoes some of you are wearing is imported. The specs that I'm wearing, the frames are imported. So when these things are imported, they obviously don't sell these things to us in Fijian dollars. Could be sold to us in US dollars, Japanese yen, Australian dollars, euros, whatever the case may be. So we have to have enough foreign reserves to be able to trade. Generally, colloquially speaking, when your foreign reserves are low, like we have over here, in 2005, you see the foreign reserves was only $549 million. Today, the foreign reserves is $2.3 billion. Huge difference. Generally, when a country does not have large foreign reserves, people say, oh, it's going bankrupt, colloquially speaking. There are some Pacific Island countries at the moment, they don't actually allow you to take out any money from the country. We have businesses in Fiji that used to supply flour, sugar, and what have you to Papua New Guinea. At the moment, they've closed down shop. They say, you pay us first, then we supply you the flour and the rice and what have you. Because the ability to draw down funds and send funds overseas is limited. So this is a healthy sign. This also has an impact when the government goes out or when other businesses go out to international banks. It has a positive impact on your interest rates if your foreign reserves are high. It goes to show the economy is strong, the base is strong. Am I doing it right? Sorry. Okay, fiscal deficit. All governments, post-independent governments, right from Ratu Mara's government, we've always had fiscal deficits, except probably about 3 times. One of them, of course, is here, 0.5%. It's a bit of a quirk, but you can see the longer the line it is, of course, the more deficit you have year in, year out. We had a target, of course, to try and reduce deficit, but to keep it within means, you have a thing like a cyclone that has a huge impact on your ability to reduce your spending. Cyclone Winston cost us about $1.3 billion US of our GDP. It knocked off $1.3 billion. That's a large amount of money. Of course, we have to rebuild roads, bridges, jetties, schools. Schools, we allocated $170 million initially just to rebuild the schools. Over 95% of all the schools we are rebuilding did not even have an architectural plan, did not even have an engineering plan. So all those schools that are now being rebuilt by us actually now will have an architectural plan. Now will have an engineering plan. They all have a blueprint now. So next time, God forbid, if one of the schools gets partially damaged or completely damaged, we know exactly what has happened, we know exactly what materials were used, we know exactly where to fix up the joints, etc. So that's the kind of investment we have to make once you have a cyclone. It has an impact on your budget. If Cyclone Winston had not occurred, we probably would not be spending about $250 million, at least, minimum. That's apart from the fact that we spend $125 million in Help for Homes initiative, where we've given people these cards like an ATM card, they load it up and they're going to redeem that at a hardware store. So the deficits, actually, you can see it's good to have a deficit at the moment. We've got sitting on 4.5 because of the fact that we've got the cyclone rebuild efforts still continuing with that. But I'll talk to you, it has an impact, of course, on debt, which I'll talk to you later on. Government revenue. Government, of course, needs to generate revenue. The more revenue we generate, the less we have to borrow, essentially. Government revenue in 2004 was $1.1 billion. Today, government revenue is $3.8 billion. How does government revenue increase? Of course, it depends on your level of taxation. It depends also on how government is very committed towards compliance. We find a lot of companies before did not pay their taxes. There's a lot of corruption that went on. People got paid off, so they did not pay their full taxes. Of course, it also means that you're able to collect also your indirect taxes. Generally, if the economy grows, then your ability to collect tax also grows. So if all of you are spending more money now, we are therefore collecting more VAT. If you're going to the cinema, you're going buying your bongo, whatever the case may be, we are collecting more VAT. So the government revenue goes up, and we've also come up with some new ways of collecting revenue, as you will discuss later on. We've introduced some new taxes too, in particular for those who use top-end services in the economy. But this is a good space to be in when your revenue increases, because as you'll see later on, we are able to save more money. Our total government expenditure, what we've done for you is to put infrastructure development, health, education, access to justice, and social protection together, because this is where the bulk of the spending actually goes. So infrastructure development, of course, relates to the provision of water, roads, electricity. And as you know, that we've got unprecedented amount of funding that's been put in particular to rural electrification, in respect of water reticulated systems, in respect of building roads and bridges quite significantly. There are people you probably know or don't know, just only a few years ago, a lot of people drinking from creeks. People still drink from creeks, some people in some parts of Fiji. People drinking from wells with tadpoles in it. There are people who are very productive members of our country that did not have electricity. So we need to be able to connect these people to this very basic infrastructure. The example that I do use as to why it's very important, and you can see how much of a difference it makes. You have some villager who catches fish and he sells fish by the roadside. You drive along and sells fish, and at the end of the afternoon, at the end of the day, he may not sell all of his fish at the price. Maybe he's selling it for $30 a bundle. He can't sell it, so it's now about 4 p.m. It's about 5 p.m. He's getting a bit concerned. It's dark. Nobody will soon buy his fish, so he reduces the price of his fish. If somebody does not come along, what does he do? He's got no refrigeration. He actually either eats it himself or gives it away, or the fish goes bad. The moment you connect that area with electricity, if he has the refrigeration or the cooling system, he knows he does not have to reduce the price of his fish, because he can keep it in the cooler. The next day he throws a bit of water on it. You come along and sees fresh fish for sale, and he sells it still at the same price. Automatically you've improved his ability to access more income. In the same way, you have a lot of farmers who don't actually have refrigeration. They may grow beans, they may grow cabbages, etc. But because they don't have access to refrigeration, the middleman comes along and buys an entire sack of beans for $2 or $5. Then each bundle is sold to you for $2. You can see how much money the middleman is actually making. So these very basic things actually makes an enormous difference to people's ability to access or to increase their livelihoods. Now, of course, it's good for human dignity. It's part of the Constitution to have people access to these basic facilities like water, etc. Health, we've of course, as you know, increased the salaries of doctors quite significantly, and also now in the new announcements for the nurses, some nurses' salaries have gone up by about 70%, some have gone up by 20 or 30%. We have to recognize the skill sets that these people bring, and also recognize within the nursing cadre, within the medical fraternity, the different responsibilities that these people actually hold. The example that I do give is that under the old system, say if you're a senior nurse, and I'm a senior nurse dealing with, say, heart patients, if you do stenting, for example. Now, we've had overseas doctors who've told us that these nurses, these Fijian nurses, can be as good as, or are as good as, nurses in Washington, D.C., or London, or Australia, or wherever it is. But that nurse's salary was no different to another senior nurse who may be working in outpatients. You get a cut on your knee or your leg, and she puts the bandage over it. There's no distinction. Now, under the civil service reform system, those nurses with those special skill sets are recognized. Because if she makes a mistake, fools around with your heart, you can die. If this nurse makes a mistake with your wound and puts it in the wrong place, you can take out the plaster and put it in the right place. That's the level of responsibility you have. So, for example, now with the teacher's salary, the head teachers and vice principals and principals, their salaries also depend on the size of the school. A principal running a school with 1,000 students and maybe 60 to 70 teachers, the level of responsibility he or she has is different to a principal with a school of only, say, 200 students. much greater responsibility, must be paid more. So the health sector actually is a very interesting sector. We don't have enough doctor graduates coming out to fill in all the positions. We also don't have enough specialists in Fiji. Just because I've done MBBS doesn't mean I can cut you open and, do open heart surgery on you. It takes 10, 15 years to do that. So it requires investment. And there has been no investment in our human capital. And that's what we're trying to do. In the meantime, of course, we have to bring in people from overseas, and that's what we're trying to do. Education sector, as the VC said, we have now in this year's budget an allocation of about $920 million. Of that, you can take out $170 million for the rebuild program, but the rest of it is to pay for TELS, for scholarships, for the teachers, etc. Access to justice. Nobody should be denied access to justice just because they are poor. In the Constitution, there is a requirement to have access to legal aid. And I'm talking in particular regarding criminal matters, in family matters, maintenance, domestic violence, ability to write wills, draft wills. So a lot of people in Fiji had this idea that only rich people could write wills or should write wills. Low-income people should also have wills too. They also have families. They also have some assets. They also don't want family disputes. So legal aid now does all that for you. We now have a legal aid office in every single town and city in Fiji. We're now even going to places like Nambuwalu, like Kandavu, to Rotuma, Ovalau. All of these places are getting legal aid. Legal aid now is what I call the largest law firm in Fiji. They've got the most lawyers in any other practice. So we're increasing that and also increasing the services available by legal aid. Social protection, this is of course generally, we talk about social welfare. We've increased social welfare payments. There's been a mindset that when you give people social welfare, it should be the very basic, but we've said people need to live with a bit more dignity. For the first time, of course, we are now introducing specific welfare payments for people with disability. We also introduced, there's a lot of people in Fiji who do not actually have FNPF. They've never had FNPF. A villager living in Kandavu, a villager even living in Vitilevu, some cane farmer, they've always worked for themselves. They've never worked for anybody. So nobody's ever paid FNPF. And you'd be surprised at the changes that's taking place in our society. Traditionally, I have children, I grow old, my children look after me, I stay in the same house. Then they get old, their children look after them. A lot of that is not necessarily happening now. You find a lot more elderly people now in old people's homes. A lot more children may have migrated or they live in Suva, the parents are left on their own. So we started a program where anybody over the age of 70, we gave them $30 a month if they had never received FNPF as by way of a pension. Then we reduced it to 68, and we gave them $50, we reduced to 66. As announced in this year's budget, we're now going to have it at 65, and they'll get $100 a month. So even if you're a husband and wife, you still get $100 each as a pensioner, if you have never had FNPF. I have had some questions asked of me in the past few days saying, well, my father had FNPF, but he's withdrawn everything. Can you get this $100? No, you can't. It's only for those people who've never had FNPF. They're entitled to this $100 a month. So we've introduced these new things because we have to recognize that some of the social relations in society is also changing, and these people need to be looked after. Now, this is very important. Expenditure mix. Whenever you have a budget, some of the money goes towards paying for your day-to-day operations. And some of the money actually goes towards building things, your assets. So like your university, we give your university about $32 million a year. And so your university actually uses that money to, operational costs will be paying for the electricity, paying for your VC's salary, your lecturer's salary, or your teachers, your lecturers, the fuel they use to go from one campus to the other. That's what you call your operational cost, day-to-day cost. Buying the toilet paper, enough hygiene material, whatever the case may be, using rent or kill. Your capital expenditure is what the university actually spends to buy or build things. So they build another lecture theatre. Or maybe they'll re-equip the gym, which is my favorite topic at USP. That's expending in your capital area. For a government, we also have those kind of costs. But of course, for a government, we should be more skewed towards building things. We are a developing country, ladies and gentlemen. We are post-colonial society. Most colonized countries never had their colonial powers invest very heavily in infrastructure. They only invested in infrastructure wherever it suited them. So if you look at what used to happen in Fiji, only where the colonial people stayed around CSR or whatever it was, they had electricity and water. The guy 2 meters down the road did not have access to water or electricity. They did not do Tahsil roads. They only did Tahsil roads where it suited them. We, of course, now in a post-colonial society, need to ensure that everybody has access to water and electricity and roads. We have to provide that infrastructure, very, very important. Everybody now, of course, ITC services become critical. There are now 500,000 smartphones in Fiji, more SIM cards in operation than actual people in Fiji. Some of you have more than one SIM card, some for legitimate reasons, some for illegitimate reasons, whatever the case may be. Boyfriend one, girlfriend two, boyfriend two, whatever the case may be. But there are more SIM cards in operation than people. So now people see access to mobile phone as a requirement of their day-to-day living. And one should ask and say, why not? If I'm a fisherman, if I'm catching fish off the coast of in Yasawas, I should know how much I'll get for my fish in Nandi as opposed to what I'll get in Laucala. So I know where to take my fish to. I should be able to get various services on my smartphone. So, government's job is to spend more in infrastructure. Comparison. 2004, the entire amount of money that's spent by government, 83% went into operating expenditure, day-to-day running costs, salaries, photocopying paper, fuel, expenses, traveling and all of that. Only 17% went to infrastructure or capital works. By comparison, as you can see, we've been trying to increase it. Today, we have a mix. 59% of our money is spent in operating expenditure. 41%, which has been the highest ever, goes into capital expenditure. Now, the good thing about having capital expenditure now is not just playing catch-up, but it also means in 10 years' time, many of the things we are building now, you actually don't have to build it. I don't know how many of you recently been to Nandi. If you go out to Nandi, you've got a 4-lane road coming out of the airport, going towards Namaka. Now, we are building the 4-lane road. So you don't actually have to build it in the future. It's there now. It'll take care of the future traffic needs also. So by spending now, you're putting less burden on your need to spend later on. We've done a road from Nambawal to Draketi that's been tahsiled. It's done now. It doesn't need to get done anymore. The road in the 4-laning road in Nandi, I don't know how many have noticed, but there's no overhead cables. There's no overhead cables. So we actually had to make a decision, a strategic decision. When the planning for that road was being done, they said, okay, if you're going to put everything underground, the electrical cables, it'll cost you about $20 to $25 million more. So do you want to save $25 million now? Or do you want to spend it now and then you don't have to do it in the future? So we made a strategic decision, let's spend the money now. Because that $25 million cost in 5 years' time will probably cost you $30 or $50 million. Because as you know, things increase in cost. So we did that. The traditional way of building roads in Fiji, as you see that in Suva, if this is the road, they put the water pipes underneath the road too. They don't put the water pipes on the side. They put it underneath the road. So when there's a water leakage, as you know, most of the piping systems in Suva is over 50, 60 years old. Most of it. It was delayed during the colonial times, in particular in the municipality areas. Some of the pipes actually have asbestos in it. So what we are trying to do now is, when the pipe's under the road, when there's a leakage in the pipe, then you get potholes. Trucks come along and say, oh, this road is breaking up. Then somebody discovers that there's a leakage in the pipe. So what do you do to fix up the pipe? You dig up the road. You dig up the road to fix up the pipe, and then you don't fix up the road. It has a huge infrastructure cost as far as the rebuilding is done. So what we've done in Nandi, as much as possible, take out all the pipes and put it on the side of the road. Water Authority of Fiji said we have a major development program for 2019 to upgrade the pipes in Nandi. We said, no, we have to bring it forward, because if we don't do it now, when you come along to fix up your pipes, you'll dig up the nice road we've built. So So you see, this is how you have to actually strategically position yourself as far as infrastructure is concerned. So capital expenditure is where we're spending a lot of the money. Funding for education, I mean, I've spoken about this. Say 2004, 270 million, now it's 930, less 170 for capital, for school construction. You can do your maths yourself. It's about, less than, slightly less than $800 million. Free education, of course, is 2015. This is why you see the jump over here. Tertiary education loan scheme and topper scheme, this year is increased from $115.4 million to $196 million, $80.6 million more it's costing us. Increased allowances, more flexibility with TELS. I can go into the details later on. Higher education institutions, including USP, is $106.5 million. So this is the expend on education sector. As you know, the schools in Fiji, all the schools in Fiji except 12 schools, even though they may be built by a different faith-based organization, whether Catholic Church, Methodist, Muslim League, Sanatan Dharam, whatever it is, Sangam, all of these schools, it may be built by those organizations, but the actual operational cost is borne by us. So all the teachers in those schools, we fund the teachers. The textbooks, we provide the textbooks. The school bus fare subsidies, we provide that. Those 12 schools are purely what we call private schools. They don't want to have anything to do with the education system in Fiji. They run their own things like international schools, etc. There's only 12 schools. So every other school, we actually pay the grant and the school fees for that. We've also, in terms of that, the flexibility, we've given greater flexibility under TELS, and I'll talk to you about that later on. Please feel free to ask me questions later about this, or anything else for that matter. Okay, here we go. So this is what we've done. As the VC said, we had a lot of input from the university students, both from here. We visited actually 5 campuses in the budget consultations. We visited here. We went to FNU in Laucala, FNU in Nasinu, and FNU also in Samambula, and also the University of Fiji, the Sawani campus. So we will now receive an annual allowance of $6,600 instead of $4,334. Trimester student will receive an allowance of $7,000 instead of $536. And also you are able to access another $1,000 if you want, even though you may be a TELS student, you can access that for books, etc., because a lot of students made representations in that respect. This includes also, because we understand during your breaks, you still have to occupy the houses that you rent or the flats you rent. Because under the old TELS program, we stopped paying you in the holidays. You have to fend for yourself. So now we actually pay you through your holidays too, because we know you actually have to access those homes. You're not going to stop paying rent for 2 weeks just because you're in a 2-week break. So that takes care of that. This does not necessarily apply to you. This is about students studying overseas. Now, meal allowance. This was a very strong representation where the university students who stay on campus, they had the entire living allowance being paid to the university. So some of the students said to us, look, sometimes we don't want to eat the campus food. Can you just pay our rent? The accommodation can go directly from our TELS to the university, but the meal component, we want to manage it ourselves. So you'll be entitled to that. So if you want to eat at the campus, the accommodation meal, you can eat that. Or next day you want to go out and party at McDonald's and spend all your money, that's your choice. Or you don't want to eat, or you want to buy bananas and eat tin tuna and buy some bread, that's your choice. So we're giving people more choices, excuse me, from that respect. So that's one of the things that we have done. The other thing is that you no longer require guarantors for the TELS, because previously there was guarantors required. We've seen no use to actually get guarantors anymore. So even if you come from a low-income family, whatever it is, you don't have to find guarantors. Yes, if you're going to leave the country, then we need a guarantor. We've already had some people who've done their studies on the pretext of going overseas that actually migrated. So the entire loan is outstanding. So Fiji has lost. You have lost. So we don't want people to do that. We don't need guarantors. You can have access to TELS if you're on a scholarship. That's fine. But if you go overseas, there are some people we recognize. There are a lot of Fijians who are now asked to go and work in other Pacific Island countries. You can simply get your employer to say, look, they're going off to work there. That's not a problem with us. Now, of course, the TELS loans will be deducted at source through FIRCA, or now it's called FRCS, Fiji Revenue and Customs Services people. So they'll do that at source, which is a lot easier to do. You can also now change your programs. We recognize the fact that some people, you may join the university and say, I'm going to do accounting and HR, but you realize after 6 months or months you do accounting and IT. You want to change the course completely. Before under TELS, if you're under TELS, you weren't allowed to do that. Or you could do that, but they would not pay for that. So now we'll pay for that. But please change your course only once. You can't keep on changing it. So it's a once-off. So if you know, because we recognize that people, when they come to university, they may not exactly know what they want to do. They may be doing a course because their parents told them to do so, and then they come here and they decide to do something else. So you can actually switch courses. The other thing, we've also said that you can, if you fail a unit, please don't try and do this, but if you do fail, we will pay for you to do it again, but only once. I'm not going to get you to repeat twice. You can repeat once, so now TELS will also pay for that. Students can upgrade qualifications, so if you've come at a certificate level on TELS, then you can go to diploma. TELS can also be provided. If you want to go from diploma to degree, TELS will also pay for that. After degree, we don't pay for TELS, but that's something we're looking at in the future in terms of postgrad studies, but not for the moment. We've done something over here. This does not apply to USP, but the FNU actually has certain courses in engineering where they don't require the students to actually do year 13. Under TELS, under the law, it was that you're only eligible for TELS or the scholarship if you complete year 13. But for these certain engineering courses, they can take students who've done only year 12. So we've allowed them to do that because there's actually a shortage of engineers in Fiji too. This is something new. If you are graduating next year, if you come from a low-income family and earn less than $30,000 a year, we'll give you $300 for you to do what we call a startup. We're actually trusting you with this $300. You may take the $300 and go and have a big beer party. That's your choice. But the whole idea is that we give you this $300 because there may be, you may want to buy a suit to go for an interview. You want to buy certain tools for your job. You may be living in Vanuatu. You've gone back home. You need to come for a job interview. You need to pay for the fare to come down to Suva. So we've given this. It's a grant. It's not a loan. So you don't have to pay us back, but we assume that you'll use it wisely. National toppers, of course, we had to increase the allocation because more and more people coming through. When we started the toppers, of course, you have to pay for the first lot. The first lot are now second year. Then you have a new set of first lots. Then the second lot has become the third lot, and so it's moved along progressively. So we expect that to increase until at least the fourth year. Then it'll stabilize. We've also, the other point that I've also that's not here is we have a YES program called the Youth Entrepreneurship Scheme. So what we are saying to you that just because you've completed your qualifications, you obtained your degree, it doesn't mean you should only become a job seeker. You may actually want to become a job creator. You may actually want to start your own business. So you, for example, you may do environmental science. You've got enough qualifications to maybe become an environmental consultant. And you may want to start up your own business. So we have allocation a maximum of $20,000 to help people start up their own business. Or you may be an IT person. A couple of you got together and want to start up, a new app. You need some funding for that. So we've got a panel. It's from the private sector. The chairman, the CEO of ANZ is going to be the chairperson of that, and we'll be putting out more information on this. What is the requirement that you need, in the application form, what you need to have to comply with, and we'll give you this funding. It's also a grant for you to be able to start up because we really believe that you can also be job creators as opposed to simply job seekers. And we think there's a lot of, one of the things that I personally also found in the consultations, there's a lot of intellect, a lot of knowledge base, a lot of new ideas that the young people have, and we want to actually engender that and foster that. And we want to give you those opportunities to do that within the means that we do have. Okay, this is what, we put that there. There you go. That's the criteria for that. They changed it, huh? You put this in. Okay. Selection panel, I've already said that online applications will be launched soon. So there you go. That's the Youth Entrepreneurship Scheme. But you have to finish your degree. Can't do it halfway through. At the moment, we cannot afford it. Please finish your degree, then you'll be eligible for that. Just again, funding for roads and bridges, we just put that, compare that. PWD days, 55 million. Today is $528 million. As I said, a lot of it is to do with rebuild. A lot of it is to build back smarter and a lot more, technologically savvy. We are currently also looking at new street lighting modules where we're getting what we call smart poles, which we can do a lot more with that. And you see a lot more traction in that area. Water and energy, again, as I mentioned, access to electricity. We've increased also, we have the free water scheme. If you have a home that earns less than $30,000 a year, you are eligible to 90,250 liters of free water if there's a water authority of Fiji services there. That's based on 5 people in a home. That's how we came up with that figure. The World Health Organization says that you and I as individual human beings require 50 liters of water to drink, to wash ourselves, to cook, to bathe, to go to the toilet. All of that is based on that. So if you extrapolate that, it comes over 90,000 liters of water. So if you earn less than $30,000 a year, the household, you're eligible for that. We also have rural electricity subsidy. We've actually now improved this quite significantly. Previously, if the household earned, which we introduced about 3 or 4 years ago, if the household earned less than $30,000 a year, and if you used 95 kilowatts or less, so if you went over 96, you won't be eligible. But if you use less than 95 kilowatts, then we paid half of your electricity cost. The unit cost of electricity is 34 cents a unit for domestic usage. So we paid 17 cents. Now we've changed that. Now we are saying if you earn less than $30,000, the household, up to 100 kilowatts will subsidize. So even if you use 150, for the first 100 we'll actually subsidize because you're earning $30,000 or less, which is a huge difference, and in fact a lot more beneficial. So we pay 70 cents every dollar because we want FEA to obviously make the right money, and government on the side then pays directly to FEA your component of the 17 cents. Rural electrification, of course, Rural electrification, this includes, electrification in many of the rural areas. We do not have electricity even around Vitilevu. That's all being done. Many of the rural areas, a lot of the schools are getting electricity. I went to, for example, Vanolevu in an area, Pasenganga. Enormous amount of cane comes from there. They're still drinking from wells. They don't have access to electricity. And if we were able to connect these people, the level of productivity will increase. Good area to grow vegetables, etc., but they don't do it because they say we're so isolated. If you grow the vegetables, if you keep it overnight, it goes bad. So the moment you connect them to electricity, it actually means that their productive capacity goes up and the country's GDP goes up. So that's what we have. Let me pull that up again. Funding for health, as I mentioned earlier on, you can see the funding has increased significantly, but we are actually restricted by the number of people. We bought an MRI machine. It's the first MRI machine in Fiji and indeed in the South Pacific. But we did not have anybody that could read the MRI film. You need to be correctly qualified to read the film, the images. So these are the kind of shortage of skill sets that we do have. I was at Suva Grammar School where they had 250 students in the budget consultations and about 25 schools. And a lot of the students complained about the fact that there was no student counselors. They said, most of the schools, we don't have professional student counselors. And so the teachers double up as counselors. Can you give us more counselors? We should have more counselors. I said, yes, I agree with you. The problem is, I said, we don't have enough counselors. So I asked them a question. I said, how many of you want to, when you leave school, go to university, want to become a professional counselor? Nobody put up their hand. We don't even have a speech therapist, ladies and gentlemen, a qualified Fijian speech therapist. There are many babies that are born in Fiji today who may have an auditory impediment, a speech impediment, but if you make intervention at the right time, you can fix it up. They can be cured. But we don't have the people to do that. If you see in the budget, we've given the Hilton School, I think about $850,000, because they do have some intervention mechanisms. They've got one speech therapist from overseas. Because you see, the way that we look at it is that if we're able to make that intervention now, that child will become more productive. You'll be able to realize the full potential. So we have to invest in those things. Otherwise, you'll have a lot more people who will actually be, handicapped by those types of issues that we should be actually making early interventions in. This is what I talked to you about earlier on. The blue line all the way from there to there is how much money we make in collection of revenue, what we call operating revenue. Out of that money, this brown bit is what we spend, and this is how much savings we have, what we call operating savings. If you see the trend 2004, how much savings have we actually increased? How has savings increased? For two reasons. One of them, we're being a bit more mamangi about things, be stingy, kanjus, where we spend money in operating expenditure. So we're doing things smarter. We're buying things at a more cheaper rates. We're negotiating harder when we buy for government. And the second thing, of course, is that revenue has gone up. So when you have a, when you have a higher operating savings, it means we have to borrow less. We do have to borrow, but we have to borrow less. Obviously, if your margin is there, your operating savings is there, you have to borrow a lot more. And I'll come to borrowing now after this. Okay, government debt. The line to be concerned about is this line here, is what you call a debt to GDP ratio. So these are the actual figures. This is the amount of debt that we have, okay? In what you call the nominal terms, the actual debt itself. But this is as a percentage of your GDP. This is what matters. I'll give you an example. Assuming that our debt, your income or your GDP is say $100. We then go out and borrow $20. So you would say your debt to GDP ratio is 20%, because $20 of 100 is 20%. But assuming then your income increases to $500. Your income increases to $500 and your GDP is say $500. Then you go and borrow $50. So you've almost borrowed 2.5 times more of $20. But as a percentage of it is 10%. You get my drift? So the wealthier you become, the bigger your capacity to be able to borrow in nominal terms. But as a percentage of your total wealth, it's decreasing. So you can see here is a percentage. So over here, let me give you an example. In 2006, the total debt was $2.8 billion. But as a percentage of GDP, it's 53.3. Today, the debt is 5.2, but as a percentage of GDP is 47.5. It fits in perfectly with what I was saying. $100, $20 you borrow is 20%. $500 you borrow $50, it's only 10%. So actual amount of money has gone up, you borrowed, but as a percentage of GDP, it's actually come down. And that's really what matters. It was interesting, the other day in Parliament, I think the opposition people were saying to us, they're saying something about Canada, we should follow Canada and way things are done in Canada. And I said to them, the debt, this gentleman was there, I think. The debt to GDP ratio in Canada is 92%. 92%. Our debt to GDP ratio is 47.5. The total nominal debt outstanding for Canada is $1.2 trillion. Nobody says Canada is not doing well. You don't have a negative image in Fiji about Canada. So why are some people saying that about Fiji? So you have to understand, a lot of people are talking about debt without actually understanding, including I think some people here from USP too. Debt, we've done some comparisons, debt to GDP comparison. Japan, debt to GDP ratio is 239.2%. The nominal debt exposure is how much? 16 trillion. $16 trillion debt they have. Debt to GDP ratio is 239.2%. USA, 107.4% debt to GDP ratio. You have the figure for that? something ridiculous like some $1 trillion. Comparable countries, Maldives, island economy, debt to GDP ratio is 81.5, Seychelles 68.6, Nauru 65, Mauritius. Mauritius is interesting. I went to Mauritius this year. I was fortunate enough to go there. I was there for about, I think, 2 nights. Mauritius is very similar to Fiji. They also had sugar as their major economic base. The difference now in Mauritius is all the sugarcane plantations are only owned by about 5 companies. In Fiji, we have small farmer holdings. But Mauritius decided a few years ago, they made a strategic decision. They said, we have to invest very heavily in our infrastructure. And they saw themselves as an area of stability right next to Africa. They're very close to Africa. So, a lot of people have a negative image about Africa. So they set up ITC parks. So they said to all these multinational companies, you come and set up your ITC services to provide service to Africa from Mauritius. They set up 3 or 4 hospitals with some Indian companies. So a lot of Africans now come for medical services to Mauritius. They build 4-lane highways, ITC infrastructure. Their total debt exposure is US $6 billion. Our debt exposure is $2 billion US dollars. $2 billion US equates to about our Fijian debt. Theirs is $6 billion US dollars. The debt to GDP ratio is higher than us. But guess what? The economy is doing well. Because the trick is to be able to spend money, or when you borrow money, to invest it in the right places, to ensure they will give you productive capacity in your country. And that's what they've done. And in fact, the debt levels were higher, but they've managed to reduce their debt levels because of the huge economic input into their country. They, for example, did an entire new airport. They changed their ITC systems. They now process, for example, overseas applications within 3 days. You get your EI assessment, you get your immigration work permits, you get your company registered. All of these things done in 3 days' time. So that's how they've invested to ensure that they provide productive capacity for the future. Tuvalu is there, of course. Samoa, Fiji sits there as 45.8%. Australia, Philippines. Now these are debt to GDP ratio, but in nominal terms, if you look at the actual figures, they will be much higher than what we have. And these are the other countries in comparison. Papua New Guinea is interesting, 33.5%. But if you look at the foreign exchange, they have got huge problems with the foreign exchange remittances, etc. Just very quickly, some of the major revenue policies that we put in this budget. Thank you. Income tax threshold has increased from 16,000 to 30,000. So, if you, before 1st of August, if you earned more than $16,000 a year, you have to pay taxes. Now you don't have to pay any tax until you earn $30,000, which is a huge boost. So those people who've got a pay rise, in fact, have in a way got 2 pay rises. They not only have got a pay rise, but whatever they used to pay as tax, they no longer pay that as tax. So they take the entire money, wages home, except for the F&PF component that they have to pay. Dividend tax removed. This is for companies. If you start working and your employer decides to give you health insurance, they can claim that as a tax deduction. We've got a new environment climate adaptation levy. The taxes have not gone up. We've just changed the permutation. I can talk to you about that later. Various duty reductions on buses, taxis, inter-island vessels, baby products, construction industry, etc. Now you can, of course, get all of this information, www.economy.gov.fj. We have the budget estimates. If I can show you what a budget estimate is like. Sorry, let me just take this off. This is the budget estimate. You'll find that in the website. So, for example, you can open the page and all the different ministries. So, for example, I just find something appropriate. So, Ministry of Fisheries. So, it says, it gives you the summary of the total expenditure by the ministry, how much the ministry is getting, and then you have the different divisions: head office, economic policy, planning and statistics, general administration, offshore fisheries, how much money each of these departments is getting. or are getting. That's the budget estimates. Then you have the budget address, that's the address that I give as Minister of Economy. Then we have the supplement to the budget, which Kalera will actually hold up to you. That's all the information in addition to the budget that you need to take into consideration. We have the budget flyers. We started this last year, which actually has been, I hope you've got the budget flyers. It has been distributed. So this has got, just to make it easy, a quick snapshot summary. So this is Ministry of Education, Heritage and Art, how they're spending the money, where their money is going, health, Prime Minister's office, whatever the case is. You can find all of that, and that's for your information. And then, of course, we've got the right of reply to the budget. And that's what we actually have on the website. For you to be able to access that information. That's a thank you. So we'll just open up the floor now for any questions or queries, any comments you may have. We can talk about any of the slides that you have. I think we've got people going around with mics. And then I'll leave it to the MC. Thank you.
Thank you, Aji. And can we just first give the AG a round of thanks for a very interesting talk. I now invite